They told you to never walk alone. But what if solitude is exactly where your power begins? In a world obsessed with validation, walking away makes you dangerous because you're no longer easy to control. Everyone wants applause. Few are willing to grow in silence. And that's why most people never become truly powerful. Welcome to StoicCraft, where we don't just talk about stoicism, we apply it to the chaos of modern life. If you're tired of feel-good advice and ready to build unshakable inner strength, you're in the right place. 1. The power of walking alone. There comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when you realize no one is coming to rescue you. Not your friends, not your family, not the people who once promised they'd never leave. The support fades, the applause stops, the silence begins, and it's precisely in that silence where your real life begins. We live in a time obsessed with visibility. Everyone wants to be seen, to be praised, to be followed. But this message isn't for the people chasing attention. This isn't for the crowd pleasers or the ones still waiting for external validation to feel whole. This is for those who are finished waiting, for those who are ready to stop performing and start becoming. Because becoming unbreakable doesn't happen on a stage. It doesn't happen in the spotlight or in the warm embrace of applause. It happens in solitude. It happens in the cold, uncomfortable spaces where no one's watching. You walk alone. You rise alone. And if you have the courage, you win alone. Marcus Aurelius didn't write to impress the world. He wrote to remember who he was, especially when the noise of Rome blurred the truth. And in that same spirit, we begin again. We strip away what isn't real, the applause we once craved, the approval we begged for, the masks we wore to be accepted. We return to the one relationship we must never abandon, our relationship with ourselves. If you're ready to face the silence, the kind that makes excuses vanish and makes space for real strength, then stay. If you've ever felt invisible, misunderstood, underestimated, this message is yours. And no, you're not alone on this path, but you are the only one who can take the next step. One step into the silence so you can finally hear your own voice. There is a certain kind of silence most people fear, not the absence of sound, but the absence of distraction. It's the silence that arrives when the world stops pulling at your attention, when the noise fades and there's nothing left but you and your thoughts. After his company downsized, a middle-aged man received all the usual advice. Fix your resume. Apply nonstop. Stay busy, keep moving, or you'll spiral. But instead of diving into job listings, he did something different. He started walking at dawn. No phone, no destination, just him and the morning air. At first, the silence was brutal. The streets were still. His thoughts were chaotic. The absence of structure felt threatening, almost foreign. But as the days passed, something shifted. The static in his mind began to clear. The urgency to do something soft. And in that growing stillness, a single question emerged. Am I living the life I truly want? That question didn't come from a self-help book or a coach or a podcast. It came from somewhere deeper, from a voice he hadn't heard in years. A voice long buried under the pressure to perform, to earn, to keep up. You see, silence doesn't always mean isolation. Sometimes it means reconnection, not with others, but with yourself. And this reconnection doesn't require a retreat. or a monastery. It begins in small moments. A mother sitting in her car after school drop-off, just breathing before the day begins. An elderly neighbor pausing mid-gardening to watch a single leaf twist in the wind. These aren't dramatic scenes, but they are where the real transformation happens. These ordinary pauses hold extraordinary power, because they make space for something deeper to emerge, not the version of us we curate for the world, but the version patiently waiting beneath it all. That inner voice doesn't scream, it doesn't demand. It simply waits, and when the noise dies down, it speaks. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." But that retreat doesn't come naturally. It requires a conscious step toward it. And that step often feels awkward, maybe even unbearable, especially if your identity has been shaped by motion, productivity, or applause. The mind, when left unoccupied, will reach for distractions like a drowning man reaches for a rope, a task, a screen, a notification, anything but silence. But if you stay with it, if you let the stillness remain, something beautiful happens. The facade falls away. The real you begins to emerge, not the version you show in meetings, not the smiling face on your profile, but the version who dares to ask real questions and needs real answers. Most people don't realize how emotionally addicted they are to stimulation. From the moment the alarm goes off, they flood their senses, news feeds, traffic, emails, caffeine, noise. Constant movement feels like control. But when the input stops, what remains? That's the test. That's where emotional resilience is. Forged, not in performing, but in sitting quietly with your thoughts and refusing to escape them. Because only then can you hear what truly matters, your doubts, your desires, your values, the parts of you that don't clamor for attention, but carry the weight of truth. Clarity doesn't come from feedback or applause. It comes from being still long enough to hear the quiet voice within. So don't overlook the moments that seem unproductive. The silent walk, the early morning without a phone, the 10 minutes staring out the window after a long day. These aren't distractions from your life. They are the doorway back to it. Sometimes the answers we chase, the clarity we seek, won't come from striving harder or being louder. They come the moment we stop running, the moment we become quiet enough to finally hear ourselves. Because the most powerful voice you will ever hear won't be someone else's. It will rise in silence, and it will sound like the truth, too. Refuse dependency to build uncheckable inner power. There's a subtle form of weakness that often disguises itself as comfort. It doesn't scream or demand attention. It whispers in the background, showing up as convenience, support, or even affection. But at its core, it's dependency. And over time, no matter how well-intentioned it seems, it begins to erode your sense of independence until one day you realize you don't quite know how to stand without someone else holding you up. Take a friend of yours, for instance. She always had someone there to lean on. When bills stacked up, her parents came through. When she struggled with school, her boyfriend helped her change her major, convincing her it was for the best. Decisions were rarely hers to make. Life had always offered her a safety net until, one by one, the threads started to vanish. Her parents were overwhelmed by their own crisis. The relationship ended, and the people she had come to rely on simply weren't there anymore. What followed wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was confusion, a deep sense of uncertainty, not because she was incapable, but because she had never truly lived by her own judgment. Her entire compass had been outsourced, and now that there was no one to check in with, she didn't know which way to turn. And strangely enough, that painful moment when the silence finally replaced the feedback was also the beginning of something powerful. Because in that vacuum, a new voice surfaced. Not a hotline, not a notification, but a quiet internal guide. A voice that had always been hers, buried under layers of reassurance and advice. And that voice didn't give her a plan. It didn't promise her safety. It simply asked the question that changed everything. What would you do if you could no longer depend on anyone else? Most people are never asked to answer that question. They're so conditioned to check with someone else to seek a second opinion, to get a comforting nod of approval, that they've forgotten how to act from within. They've lost the muscle of self-trust. But the Stoics saw this coming. They warned against building your emotional foundation on anyone else's strength. The Stoics didn't teach you to isolate yourself. They didn't argue against connection or community. What they warned against was outsourcing your center, relying so heavily on someone else that their absence shakes your world. They believe the self must be a fortress, and if others are holding up your walls, they also have the power to tear them down. Self-reliance doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you grow cold or detached. It means clarity. Because before you can genuinely love someone, you must first know that you are not offering love as a lifeline. Before you can build something with someone else, you must prove to yourself that you can build something without them. Before you can stand with someone, you have to be able to stand alone. That kind of self-sufficiency doesn't show up in heroic gestures. It's not loud. It reveals itself in the quiet, private decisions you make when no one is watching. It's choosing discipline when nobody checks on you. It's choosing alignment over applause. It's waking up, moving forward, and refusing to wait for permission. There is a moment, often subtle, often private, when you stop hoping someone will save you. You stop reaching for a lifeline. You just begin. You start with what you have. You trade comfort for clarity. You stop asking if it's okay to change, to grow, to heal. You just do it. And that moment, that internal shift, is the start of unshakable inner power. Because once you've proven to yourself that you can rise without being lifted, everything changes. You stop merely surviving. You start leading. You begin to protect your energy with discernment. And most importantly, you stop handing over the authority of your life to people who were never meant to carry it. When you no longer need someone else to keep you upright, you finally start living on your own terms. And there is nothing more powerful than that. 3. Persist in darkness to become your most dangerous self. There is a version of you being forged in silence, not in front of a crowd, not under a spotlight, but in the long, quiet hours, where effort outweighs ease. Think of someone you once knew, someone who seemed to vanish after a personal crisis. They stopped showing up to gatherings. They dropped off social media. Everyone assumed they were spiraling. But what no one saw was this: mornings before dawn, when they sat alone with nothing but their thoughts and a pen, rewriting a resume they hadn't touched in a decade. Or maybe you knew someone who deleted every distraction just to study in solitude after failing an exam that shook their confidence to the core. No likes, no applause, no external motivation. Just silence and repetition. That's where real transformation begins. Not in public, not with approval, but behind closed doors where the only audience is the one staring back at you in the mirror. Most people wait for the right mood, the perfect timing, or some external push to begin. But the Stoic doesn't wait. The Stoic doesn't chase the ideal moment. They rise before the world does, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. That's the path of those who become formidable, not because others witnessed their growth, but precisely because no one did. Their strength is invisible until it isn't. If you're in one of those seasons, now perhaps you're budgeting every penny after a divorce, working out alone after a health scare, or relearning a skill after being laid off. Know this: the world may not be watching, but your future self is. And your future self will thank you for not giving up in the dark, because that version of you, the one being shaped by consistency, forged in discipline, and tested by solitude, that is your most dangerous self. And it is not born in applause. It is born in the quiet. When Epictetus said, "Be content to be thought foolish and stupid," he wasn't glorifying ignorance. He was preparing you for the quiet climb, the kind of growth that doesn't earn claps but earns character. Comment. To deepen emotional impact, you could briefly connect this to real-world examples. Single parents studying for degrees at night, veterans re-entering the workforce, or laid-off workers reinventing careers midlife. These are the real Stoics of modern times, building strength where no one sees. 4. Turn quiet pain into a teacher that forges resilience. Not all pain arrives like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it enters quietly, like fog settling over your life. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. It just lingers, subtle, persistent, and heavy in the background of your everyday. You might not even know how long it's been there. It shows up in silence, in sighs, in unfinished sentences. This is the kind of pain most people never talk about, not because it's not real, but because it doesn't feel dramatic enough to justify. For some, this pain looks like a slow erosion of purpose. Imagine the retired surgeon who once held lives in his hands, who was summoned at all hours, who led teams, made decisions, gave hope. Now no one calls. His advice isn't sought. The applause has stopped, and in its place, silence. The absence is jarring. But instead of sinking into regret, he picks up a pen, not to chase relevance, but to pass on. His hard-earned lessons, written not for fame, but for those who may one day walk the path he once carved. His silent ache becomes a gift. Or think of the young man freshly heartbroken, blindsided by the sudden end of what he thought was love. He sits alone in his apartment, the echo of her absence louder than any argument. He wants to blame her, blame timing, blame anything. But instead, one night, in the quiet, he asks himself the harder question: what part of me have I been avoiding? That single moment of self-inquiry cracks open a new chapter. He doesn't chase healing to be more likable or desirable. He studies his own patterns, not to fix himself for someone else, but to meet the version of himself he's long ignored. That's the alchemy of quiet pain. It doesn't just hurt, it shapes. It exposes what noise concealed. It reveals the truth you were too busy to notice. And the Stoics knew this well. They understood that pain was not a punishment, but a test, a teacher. It's not about gritting your teeth and pretending you're fine. It's about sitting with the discomfort and asking, what is this trying to show me? Life doesn't wait for your permission to change. It doesn't check if you're ready before it dismantles your plans. One phone call, one conversation, one unexpected moment, and everything shifts. But what happens next is the real test. You can let pain harden you, make you bitter, close you off. Or you can let it deepen you, give you perspective, empathy, emotional strength. The Stoics didn't aim for a false stoicism, a cold indifference. They sought a deeper resilience, the kind that lets you feel fully without losing your center. They didn't run from pain. They invited it to speak, and they listened not to suffer, but to transform. 5. Live by your values without needing external approval. There's a quiet power in living by your values without needing anyone else to understand. It doesn't get headlines. It doesn't win popularity contests. But it's the kind of power that lasts. In a world obsessed with visibility, where every action is filtered, liked, and posted, choosing to live with integrity, even when no one's watching, is an act of modern rebellion. Take your cousin, for example. He walked away from a 6-figure corporate job to teach at a small community school. On paper, it looked irrational. People whispered behind his back, questioned his ambition, and made assumptions about his choices. But he didn't flinch, because deep inside he knew he wasn't stepping away from success. He was stepping into significance. He wasn't chasing titles. He was aligning with his purpose. Or think of the single mother who refuses to post every act of parenting online. Not because she's shy, but because she doesn't need applause to validate her sacrifices. Each bedtime story, every packed lunch, every hard boundary she sets for her child, those are her quiet victories. And she celebrates them not with hashtags, but with peace of mind. Her purpose isn't for show. It's lived. In a society trained to perform even virtue itself, their silence becomes a statement. It says, I don't need your approval to be real. I already know who I am. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've turned down a promotion that didn't feel right. Walked away from a relationship that looked perfect from the outside. Or chosen a slower, more mindful path while others rushed ahead. You didn't do it to be different. You did it because your inner voice was louder than the noise around you. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's the self-leadership. Stoicism teaches not to impress others, but to honor your inner compass. Living by your values without applause is hard, because it forces you to confront one of the deepest human desires, the need to be seen, affirmed, and accepted. But the Stoic understands that self-respect must replace the craving for recognition. If your peace can be destroyed by a disapproving look or an unkind comment, it wasn't peace, it was performance. So you choose differently. You trade popularity for principle. You stop asking, will they approve? And start asking, is this aligned with who I am? You listen, yes, but you no longer depend. You welcome feedback, but no longer let it define your direction. And slowly, what once felt like isolation transforms into freedom. You walk through the world anchored not in opinions but in values. The noise is still there, but it doesn't move you, because your compass isn't outside anymore. That's when your confidence changes. It becomes quieter, deeper, untouchable. You don't need to defend your decisions. Your life does that for you. You don't need to announce your values. Your actions walk them. And while the world chases trends, applause, and status, you chase something deeper: integrity. Not because it's impressive, but because it's real. And in a world built on noise, nothing is more powerful than someone who lives with quiet. Clarity. 6. Build your inner fortress so nothing external can break you. At some point, life will shake your foundation. The career you've built may suddenly vanish. The relationship you trusted may fall apart. The routine that held you steady may collapse without warning. And in that moment, the question becomes clear: what's left when everything external is gone? For many, the answer is chaos, panic, despair, paralysis. But for the Stoic, the answer is stillness. Not because life didn't hurt them, but because they've built something no storm can touch. An inner fortress. This kind of strength doesn't appear by accident. It's not a switch you flip when life gets hard. It's the product of hundreds of unseen choices, morning after morning, night after night, where you choose to guard your peace even when no one notices. Picture a father who suddenly loses his job. The income stops. The title, the role, the identity, all gone. But step inside his home, and you won't see a man unraveling. You'll see him waking up on time, helping his daughter with homework, tidying the kitchen, shaving each morning. Like the world is still watching. He's not pretending the pain doesn't exist. He's just refusing to hand it the keys to his identity. That's what inner fortification looks like. It's not about being unaffected. It's about not being undone. Or maybe you've been through a personal collapse, an illness, a betrayal, a loss you never saw coming. And instead of broadcasting your pain, you quietly rebuilt. You took time off social media. You journaled in the dark. You walked, breathed, processed. And slowly something grew inside. Not just healing, but depth. That's what the Stoics prepared for. Not comfort, but character. Not praise, but presence. Because they knew the truth most people avoid: anything external can be taken. But what's internal? Your clarity, your discipline, your peace is yours to build and yours to keep. And it's in those unglamorous moments, the quiet mornings, the hard conversations with yourself, the choices to stay grounded instead of reactive, that your fortress is formed. Brick by brick, value by value, action by action. So when life hits, you don't collapse. You respond, you adjust. You stay standing, not because you're lucky, but because you're built. 7. Build your inner fortress so nothing external can break you. At some point, life strips away what you thought was stable. The career that once defined you is gone. The relationship that felt permanent ends. The routines you built your identity on fall apart. And when that happens, most people panic. They scramble to fill the space. But for the Stoic, this is not the end, it is the beginning. Because what remains after the collapse is the truth of who you really are. And if you've done the inner work, brick by quiet brick, what remains is stillness. Think of the father who lost his job. The income stopped. The identity tied to his. Roll vanished, but in his home you don't see chaos. You see structure. He still wakes up early. He still folds laundry. He still reads to his daughter at night. He's not in denial, he's in discipline. That's what the Stoics meant by the inner citadel, a strength built from the inside out, not from control over circumstances, but from mastery over response. Or think of the woman you know, the one who just ended a long relationship. She doesn't post heartbreak anthems or chase distractions. She writes in her notebook. She walks in silence. She rebuilds herself without an audience. What's powerful is not what she lost, but what she preserved. Her center, her calm, her clarity. The world may have taken something from her, but it couldn't take her foundation. That is the essence of the inner fortress. It's not walls to hide behind, it's a ground you stand on. A space within you that cannot be moved by the chaos around you. And every choice you make, especially when no one is watching, either strengthens or weakens it. It's in those subtle moments. When a painful message comes in, and instead of reacting, you pause and breathe. When you choose to journal instead of spiral. When you remind yourself what you're grateful for, not to fake happiness, but to protect your peace. These aren't dramatic gestures, they're daily disciplines. And each one is a brick. The Stoics never promised a life free from pain. They promised that you could build something inside yourself that pain can't touch. That loss, betrayal, or failure could strike, but wouldn't shatter you. Because resilience isn't avoiding emotion, it's learning how to hold it without letting it consume you. So when you stretch instead of scroll, when you forgive without being asked, when you end the day with self-respect instead of distraction, you're not just getting through, you're becoming. Ask yourself, what am I building when no one's watching? Because that's when the real construction happens. You're shaping the version of yourself who won't break under pressure, who won't be ruled by impulse, who responds with wisdom even when the world expects chaos. The storms will come, they always do, but the fortress you build in silence will hold. Not because you're invulnerable, but because you've chosen to become unshakable. And when you walk alone, rise alone, and win alone, you don't do it to prove a point to the world. You do it to return to yourself. You do it because you finally understand you are the foundation. The Stoic path doesn't offer comfort. It offers clarity. It doesn't teach you to avoid pain, but to use it. It doesn't tell you to chase applause, but to walk in alignment with your values, even in silence. And from that alignment, something extraordinary grows. A calm that doesn't depend on others. A strength that doesn't need recognition. A peace that isn't shaken by outcomes. Every day you persist without applause, without permission. You add to that fortress. And when life tries to break you, it will find that you've built something it cannot touch, because the strongest version of you was never meant to be public. It was always meant to be personal, quiet, steady, and yours alone. Now let's hear from you. What part of your life are you learning to face alone right now? Drop it in the comments. We read every one. And if this message resonates with your journey, hit like, subscribe, and check out our playlist on emotional independence and inner strength to go deeper into the Stoic mindset. Your path may be quiet, but you're never truly alone in walking it.